Hello, good morning. My name is Jimena Perry. I'm the project manager of the Explorers of the International Federation for Public History. Many of you already know me. Today, I'm extremely pleased to have with me my colleague and dear friend, Karla Escobar. Karla is going to talk about her graphic novel that she just launched some months ago. She's going to be talking to us about visualizing indigenous histories in legal contexts. Karla Escobar-Hernández is a historian and political scientist from the Universidad de los Andes, Bogotá, Colombia. She holds a master's degree in history from the same institution and a master's in history of the Hispanic world from the Universitat Jaume I of Castellón, Spain. Karla received her PhD in law from the Universidad de los Andes, having conducted her doctoral research at the Max Planck Institute for Legal History and Legal Theory, where she is now a postdoctoral fellow. Her research focuses on indigenous legal practices in Cauca, Colombia during the early 20th century, particularly examining contested ideas surrounding indigeneity, justice, and citizenship. More recently, her work has expanded to study alternative legal understandings within indigenous communities, such as the concept of Derecho Mayor. This pursuit has driven her interest in collaborative, participatory, and interdisciplinary research methodologies, culminating in developing the Transmedia HistoryTelling project she currently leads at the Max Planck Institute. Through this project, she has developed a narrative involving comics, muralism, and video, engaging indigenous artists from the region. And I want to add that the Explorers and Transmedia HistoryTelling have partnered several times to do events. So I'm really, really happy uh, to have Karla here with us. Karla, welcome and thank you for accepting our invitation.
No, thank you, Jimena. I'm really, really excited about sharing this work with you today. I know your project from a long time. I really admire the project, the Explorers project, and I'm really excited of being able to talk about Camino Ruptura today. So let's start. I would like to start this presentation taking a moment to reflect on the title we have chosen. This title, Visualizing Indigenous Histories in Legal Context. And in particular, I would like to focus on three ideas that make up the title and how they connect with specific questions I want to explore today. The first one is indigenous histories. Sorry. And here the question is why it's important to always speak of indigenous histories in the plural, and what this implies in a historiographical and methodological level. The second one is visualizing. I think this is the big concept for today's talk is what role do I believe visualizing plays concerning historical methodology? And finally, I like to add another questions that, while it's not in the title, is implied in this session, and that is, why is this discussion relevant for public history? Because it looks like it's a discussion very focused on the method and legal history, but I also think, and I would like to discuss why this is important also for public history. So why not indigenous history? So this concern regarding the pluralization of the histories of indigenous people stems from my doctoral research that was titled Citizenship, Justice, and Indigeneity, a History of Indigenous Legal Practices in Cauca from 1880 to 1938. In this research, I wanted to do many things. The first was to address a historiographical gap that existed between the literature of indigenous people in relation with the law and their engagement with the law during the Colombian period, during the colonial period. And the literature covering the 19th and especially the 20th century, where figures like Manuel Quintín Lame were considered or portrayed as an anomaly, like the unique indigenous leader that were able to talk about, to talk in the language of law. And of course, this curiosity, like these questions I have, were existed after an archival research that I spent making for many years. And this archival research, however, revealed a wide diversity of leaderships in the region. That like Manuel Quintín Lame was not alone. It was not an exceptional case. I also found multiple political and legal strategies these leaders developed to protect their collective lands, and most importantly, the role these various leaders played in defining what it meant to be indigenous in different contexts. So that led me to use a metaphor in the thesis that I use currently. That is the multiple voices. And from that time, I became obsessed with that idea of the multiple voices. Because during when I was writing the text, I was see how these ideas of citizenship, justice, indigeneity were constructed through a very rich dialogue between the multiple voices of the state. Like the state is not like a one structure, but it's an institution that is conforming very, very different voices that talk in different languages, and I'm talking metaphorically, that don't have the same aims, political aims. They different have ideologies, and also the multiple voices of indigenous leaderships. They were also very different between each other. They construct interpretations that not always are coherent or can be oppositional. So for me, it became clear that it was impossible to understand to understand these indigeneity and the indigenous citizenship without comprehending these different dialogues, these multiple voices that appear all the time in the sources and in the law and in the interpretations and all the context that I was experiencing. So now the question of the multiple voices extended more in the methodological aspects. So I was saying, I became obsessed with this idea of the multiple voices. So then my question was, well, if I want to hear to make a legal history that involves many different voices and try to identify the sources, I also was asking me the same question in how my method could include more voices, you know? These ideas led me to also, wait a sec, I have to make a pause here. Are you watching this? My notes. But you are watching my notes. No, okay. Because I'm seeing here. Okay. Because I'm mixing. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I'm so sorry. The question of the multiple voices also extended to what I was saying, the methodological aspects of the research, and open up new inquiries, in my own research process. One crucial question, for example, was the how how these interpretations of law that I could identify in the first part of the 20th century have a presence also in the present, and also in the constitutional process that happened in the 90s. And for example, because of that reflection, I started to review the concept, for example, like the Derecho Mayor. That was developed by the Misak people in the 1980s, but when I was trying to understand this Derecho Mayor concept, that is something that I studied after the PhD, I could trace back these legal debates that had taken place before. So what you were seeing here is the very different media I've been trying to explore during this time after the finishing of my PhD, because I thought that in order to include more voices into this discourse and this legal interpretation, it was important to include more formats. Why is that? Because by including more formats, I could, for example, include different kind of resources, audio sources, interviews. I could involve more specialists in different techniques, videographers, illustrators, and all these different interpretations about the history I was making. It was relevant for me in order to think what was the importance of thinking about legal history nowadays. So the first project was a micro-documentary series that was named Desalambrar, which consists of 5 episodes. You can watch them all in YouTube by following that QR code. This marked the beginning of what I like to describe as the individualization of research, like collectivizing the research. Because while the stories featured in the series were drawn from my thesis, visual media allowed me to pluralize the narrative. I incorporated as I was saying before, incorporating the interviews, the audio archives, the artists, included indigenous artists. For example, in this case, it was either Yangana, from the Yacona people, who illustrate the final episode. The video format also helped me to explore different types of narratives and creative processes. The second image you see here, you can see this blue point. Am I right? This. The second image you see is a video I titled un video a varias manos, a multi-handed video. I don't know if that's a good translation. Where in which I wanted to highlight again this idea of the multiple voices. This time it was in relationship to the toppling of the monuments during the social protests that took place in Colombia in 2020 and 2021. In this video was clear the link between law and historical memory and the relevance that reflecting on law had to understand this issue. Creating an audiovisual narrative in which different members, various types of primary sources and distinct skills and expertise participate, open up new research questions and prove to be highly relevant for the discipline. In this case, the process of construction was different the process of construction that happened with Desalambrar. In this case, I was more interested in, usually when you make a video, you create first organize your sources, make the script, make all the shootings, and then you make the editing, and you have then your video. But in this case, with the un video a varias manos, the process was the opposite. I tried to collect all these opinions that were happening in the very different spaces, in conversatories, in social networks, to some colleagues that were really interested in talking about this issue. And after that, from all these collaborations, we created a script. And this was, again, another attempt to collectivize the research and be able to visualize a new narrative. After making this video, it was like the input of making me reflect more about this idea of the Derecho Mayor, because it was a clear concept that was behind the toppling. Like, it was like a very clear opposition between what the Derecho Mayor allowed and what the state law allowed. So, and this is like, in this case, the making of the video was like a laboratory in which I could start thinking about new subjects and new issues.
Karla,
And then,
can you tell us, for the audience that's going to watch the video afterwards, can you tell us a little bit what is Derecho Mayor?
the Derecho Mayor right now.
Well,
Yes,
because you're
yeah.
mentioning.
Well, the Derecho Mayor is a principle of justice that was named by the very indigenous, the first one to recall the Derecho Mayor as a law that is beyond the state law, and is a particular law that has to be followed by indigenous peoples. This Derecho Mayor is constructed by very different kinds of principles. At the beginning, it's more connected with the idea of natural law. But this natural law is not interpreted in the same dimension that we as jurists interpret natural law traditionally. And this idea that exists a law that is beyond the state law started to be created really early. I can trace it in some manuscripts at the beginning of the 20th century. But it's only until the 80s that the Misak people are going to say there is a major law, and it's a law that is above the state. There is a principle of justice, and that allowed rebellion in some cases when state law is unjust. There is a principle also that comes from natural law. And this concept start to transform all the time. It started as like a principle of justice, but nowadays it has more like some procedures, is inserted in some places in a hierarchy. In other indigenous peoples have uses another concepts similar as derecho mayor, but it's now derecho propio, derecho particular. Yeah, it's like a big discussion. But well, it's this derecho. I hope I explained it well. So then after that, like exploration with video making, that was really exciting. But I decided to move to another media, was the comic. And I was really interested about exploring this media because progressively has been way more attention, and particularly in Colombia, but also in the world. If we think that at some point comic was like an anomaly, that a thing that academics were not doing, this is not the case anymore. Right now, a lot of academics, a lot of people are using comics, or making graphic histories in order to explore different problems, different dimensions of of history making and history teaching. So I was really excited about the idea of using comics and learn how to make a graphic history. The initial comic creation team was composed by 4 people, including me. It was Oscar Pantoja, who adapted my thesis into comic form. Miguel Ángel Vallejo created the illustrations, and Maria Juliana Vargas was in charge of the image research. My role was to coordinate and to rewrite the script according to based on all the team's contributions. So if that implies a lot of crying, no, maybe not a lot of crying, but it was like a lot of deconstructing things. Some knowledge I thought it was like very fixed, trying to identify what elements shouldn't be part of the comic, what should be taken out. So it was actually a collective recreation of the research I have already made before. And I remember by that point, I had gained much greater clarity about the advantages of pluralizing the research process, but for me it was not clear how I could understand better from a legal historical point of view. One, I was learning better or understanding better by using another media that I could not be possible learn or understand better when writing an article. So here I want to return to the concept of visualizing, because I think that's the key here. Is the collaborative work from all these people using constructive knowledge from their own expertise that allow us to see. I cannot see, like, make up a proper image of what was happening in the past without the intervention of all these experts, without the person who is creating the sequence of the story, without the person who made the image research, and without the person who at the end translate all of our discussions, because usually we met together, look the sources, look the story, look the proposals, and between all together we have a really interesting discussions. And then Miguel extract all our discussions and positions and created these illustrations. And that means that it's because of this collective exercise that I am allowed to see how legal practice actually takes place. Because, of course, we usually, when we are writing a history, we have a lot of things, a lot of documents, a lot of data, historiography, databases, and we create a narrative according to those elements. And when we are writing, we are having some images in our minds. We are imagining the person making the complaint. We are imagining the person reading. But it's this process of imagination is not always very accurate. So what I found is I could understand better how the law functions in everyday life because of this process of imagination. I could imagine the conversation. I could imagine the ways of association, because of as a consequence of this collective process. This seeing is closely tied to an even more rigorous research process, because usually when you are using other media, they're going to say you are trying to simplify, you are trying to tell this story in a simple way to other audiences. Well, we never know what other audiences mean sometimes, but it was the opposite. Like these collective exercise in this exercise of translating into other format allowed me to understand better, particularly law in everyday life. By imagining spaces, the clothing, the dialogues, the expressions, the specific landscapes, I could understand better what the researcher was doing. And actually, I soon understood that the aim of this research process was not simplify the narrative with the aim to access a new public, but actually allow me to create a more complex narrative. And that's the idea, the idea of the multiple voices always makes the historical narrative more complex. When I'm saying complex, I'm not saying that people are not allowed to understand it, but that it has more layers. You are allowed to reach more very different audiences that chooses to explore different channels to get to transit to the history you have created. So I want to watch here the how the comic language allow us to link aesthetics with diverse theoretical and methodological discussions. Like it's not only that the collective work that is in the base of creating a new media is not the only input that using comics or videos has, but also to allow you to explore different ways of face theoretical and methodological problems. In this case, I want to talk about the timelines. In the comic, you are going to check three timelines, and you can see it in the images you are watching here. The first one, this one, is the present. That is not the present anymore, of course, but it's that portrays the process of research. And in this timeline, is not only shows the research, but also the doubts, the questions, uncertainties that we usually have when we are researching. And I think this is a really important element to put into academic products, because sometimes I think in these uncertainties and these permanent questions are not like the protagonists in methodological courses, for example. I think students need to learn that part of this process, the process of researching and knowing implies a lot of uncertainties, particularly in history, because we only have fragments from a way more complex context. The second timeline is actually the past. That is the histories of the indigenous leaders that I had researched. And even though the stories that I was portraying in this timeline were the same as the research, my doctoral research. Of course, you have here all these different layers I was telling before. I'm putting faces into characters, I'm putting emotions, I'm putting some context, specific context. But of course, I part of the image research imply a lot of looking photographs and pictures that were not necessarily portraying during the same time, but it allowed us to imagine. We had a really big database of images that help us to imagine what a scenario that might be possible. And this scenario, even if it didn't exist, we needed to make it, the fiction has to be rigorously constructed in order to be believable. And in the third timeline, we have the future. And in the future, we have my desires. I think the desire of people discussing the comic. of people doubting about my words, of people thinking about their own personal narratives while reading the comic. And I tried after the launch of the comic recreate these scenarios that we wished at some point and make it real, with different consequences. I'm going to show you later. But this idea of the present, the past, and the future allowed me, for example, to talk more critically about historical time and how historical time was used, or was not an issue that legal historians studies. It was only was because of what I was trying to construct this narrative on a spiral that mixed past, present, and future, and the relationship that the sources that I was reading have with this time of understanding of the time that is mixed. That mix present, past, and future. I was able to do that, and I wrote about that in the introduction of the comic. And after that, I was still obsessed with the multiple voices. So I tried to make the experience even more participatory. So I invited some artists from the region, from the Cauca region, and now Valle del Cauca, Diego Cisco, Jansen Sevilla, Alexandra Hidrobo, Leonardo Imbachi, Andrés Cerón, Puyu Uma, Edira Yangane, Natalia Fernández. And they participated in illustrating the chapter covers, the covers of the chapters. And the activity here was really interesting because I gave them a chapter of the comic, and they created the illustration based on their readings, like what they thought it was relevant from this chapter, or how that was related to their present experiences. Like, I tried to not interfere in that process of creation, and the result was really interesting. If you can see here are like the raw illustrations from the chapters. You have very different interpretations, and these illustrations were with these illustrations, they also made some audio records in which they explain why they draw what they draw, and what the story in the comic recalls in their actual lives in the present. All these audio files, you can access all these audio files in the like following these QR codes. In the comic, the QR codes are inserted next to the data of the artist. And when you hit each of their interventions, you once again start to make this narrative even more rich. You can find, for example, questions regarding the Afro population. That is something that arrived from this exercise. From women, the comic only have one case of women because of the nature of the sources, and all the memoriales were written mostly by indigenous men. I only have one story about women I put in there, but it was a clear unbalance. So in these audio records, we are allowed to talk more about women, about the consequences of war, about how these old stories apparently all establish dialogues with the experiences of the present. And once again, after we finish the comic, existed the urgency to establish expanded this dialogue into other territories. So that's why we created, actually was an initiative from the artists. I just stole the idea. No, we created the idea together. But the idea actually came from them. That was to make what we named the Quintina Muralista. It was a session, was a long week in which we painted a mural each per day in different parts of the territory in Cauca and Valle del Cauca. The first one was in the Universidad del Valle, and we work with the Cabello Indígena Universitario. Most of the members are students from the Universidad del Cauca, and it's really interesting because it is a multicultural cabildo. That is, you cannot replicate this in any other context. So, the Cabildo Indígena Universitario is conformed by indigenous from very different towns and ethnicities, and they articulate a new government body inside the university, and is multicultural, is multilingual. It was a really interesting experience. We could talk more about this, each case later if you want. The next one was Puerto Resistencia, and in this case was the population were very different because there were some indigenous populations, but in most of the cases were mestizo and Afro-Colombian population. And the interpretations was really interesting to see how the reading of these indigenous leaderships were talking about their current situations and the current political aims and their memories. And it was also they portrayed, for example, in their mural, they changed a lot of the drawings. They changed the clothing. They put some mask, for example, like with the purpose of portraying the primera línea. So even though we were working with some images from the comic, it was a really new creation that involved new memories and new analysis regarding the history of the history and the law and memories. Then we went to Escuela de la Montaña. There, the major population was kids. I'm going to pass this fast, and then maybe you can ask me questions if you want. Then we went to Universidad Autónoma Intercultural Indígena in Popayán. From there, we went to Misak Universidad, and I would like to recall a situation here, for example, because when we started to paint, I remember some of the not painting, but before, because at the beginning we usually read some part of the comics or watch some videos in order to start the conversation and establish what we will. What they wanted to paint in the empty space that had the canvas. And most of the memories they have about Quintín Lame was not related with Manuel Quintín Lame, but with the arm movement of Quintín Lame. So it was really a very interesting exercise, because even though Manuel Quintín Lame had a Misak mother, his memory was not necessarily conserved in between the Pinsac people because of the relevance, the still really close memory with the armed conflict and the armed movement made under the name of Manuel Quintín Lame. Then we went to the Cabildo Rio Blanco, and I think you are in like question at this point, like, well, okay, we have talked too much about history, too much about legal history, about the multiple voices. So why all is this relevant for public history? And what I want to emphasize here is the idea that all histories, even history of law, which may seem very specific, must be public. This means they should not only reflect on the very different audiences they might have, but also consider why the process of creating historical narratives must involve methodological reflection and historiographical debate. In my case, for example, it was only through the comic and with the video that I was able to engage in critical discussions about historical time and the role of that historical time should be in talking about critical legal histories, and how a critical reading of this subject helped me to understand history of indigenous law in a new light. So usually when I talk about my work, even though I recognize myself as a public historian, I not always mention that this is a product for public history, because this is not a problem with public historian or with public history, but with history that I still cannot relate with the idea that exists a history that considers that it's not public, and that there exists a discipline in history that thinks that don't have to engage in serious analyzing and understandings of different media and different publics. So I would like to leave this question open for you to also debate, or maybe make some questions, and I would love to hear you about what do you think, would be this relationship between public history and history, and if you find, if you identify as me, like that this division is kind of problematic, because like puts public history outside the methodological and theoretical debate that all historians should be doing during these times. So thank you so much.
Carla, thank you very much. I have to apologize. I have here a cat problem. That's why my camera was off. I have a question before going to the debate about public history and history, which I think is very timely and like like really important. But I could you tell us a little bit about like all the socialization process you did with your graphic novel, and how did the people in the cabildos reacted to it? Have you done that? What feedback did you get from the indigenous people themselves after they saw the novel?
Well, it's very different in each case, in every case. For example, I was so excited. Yeah, with this kind of technique, sometimes you are really excited, because when you start to paint and discussing, you think, oh, everything has sense. I'm learning that much, and I feel so identified, and I'm really happy. That happened, for example, in Cali, in the Cabildo Universitario, in Puerto Resistencia. But progressively, I started to find out that when we were more into the resguardos in the Misako Universidad, in Rio Blanco, that my ideas of law were really state-centric. At some point, I have the feeling that the history I was writing was not very useful for their own political concerns right now. Of course, it had a place for discussing other things and for claiming, like analyzing other problems. But I remember a situation in which we were painting, and there is a a building that looks like a church. And someone said, but this is this church. What are we gonna do with this church? And but let's paint over the church and put a mountain in there. Like we don't want to portray this church. And another person said, no, but this is not a church. This is an state building. That only this figure is not a cross. It's like a window. It's an state building. And the discussion was, should we erase it? It was a debate. Should we erase it? At the conclusion was, we cannot erase it. We have to live with that. We have to live with that. I know that exists, and we have a really long tradition of dealing with the state, like suffering more or less the state. But at this point, this situation, the history they need to build is not the history with the state. That's a history that we need to learn as mestizo people. That why we don't know how indigenous people helped to build our nation state, because it was a really big participation. But for them, for most of the resguardos, I think they already know that. They are not, that's a history that is not particularly interested. They're now building the history of their own conceptions of law. For example, the Derecho Mayor, and what that means, because these different concepts have been transforming during different times. At the same time, in some cases, I felt that I couldn't even paint because everything had a meaning that was not known by me, that I didn't know that the meaning, like the skirt has to be in that color, and it has to have this baston. I don't know the name of baston
Like
in English.
paint,
The stick. Yeah, and the colors of the rose and everything need to have a meaning, all of them. And so at some point I decided I don't need to interfere this, because I I would like to know more what are all these discussions. And I felt that I was more comfortable when I was painting in this other urban context and in mestizo context, because of course this is me. This is this is the position where I'm constructing this. We are constructing this histories. But at the same time, it was like there was another situation, for example, in Rio Blanco, and I was really tired, and I started like feel like, oh my God, this thing that I'm doing is worthless. But at the end I said, no, it's actually a really important learning that is only possible to learn when you do this, because if not, you think that the history, that just because you are writing history of indigenous people, you are actually engaging with indigenous issues, and that's not the case. And I remember we were painting with the kids, and one of the covers puts the law. It's like a book that says law, and is breaking the resguardo lands. And in the back of the image, you have like the city and all the modern world. And they decided to change the order of the things, and they put as a part of the discussion, they said, we don't want to put their law. So they put greater law, greater law, I think, is in the let me check the image. You can say specific what is the word, because it was in Resguardo Rio Blanco, it was not in the Misaki, they called it different. And by changing the name, they transformed the meaning of the image. So they put like the new law, the indigenous law, healing the resguardo land, and healing also the modern world. And they put some medicinal plants. They put more the different kind of flowers and actors and people, and of course it was the questions, the historical needs they have. All the different, I think all different peoples, indigenous people had very different needs in historical arena. But in this case, the need they have, it was not to know better how their political elites were really sophisticated. We created really sophisticated arguments because they are still doing it and they know how to do it. But I think, for example, these are big questions for legal historians to participate or to open dialogues between what are the historical needs that indigenous peoples had this time, because reflecting on indigenous law, how order, how indigenous order relates with this apparently state order, like was a very different thing. It's relevant. It needs more historical research and needs, for example, more indigenous people researching under their own themes and their own interest.
That is very related to the multiple voices approach that you told us during her presentation, which I think is like really important. And also thinking about that, the example you just told us when you decided that, okay, I have to take a step back and don't paint anymore because there's a lot of meanings. That's also like, I think it's really interesting thinking like more anthropologically, if you want, like the need to step down sometimes. Sometimes the best thing you can do when you're listening to other voices is know when to step back, when to put your camera down, when to stop taking notes. Like I think that's really really important. Karla, thank you very much. One thing before I give the word to the audience, I really like how you positioned yourself in the comic book itself because we saw you as part of the history, and I think that also part of the multiple voices. That's really interesting because you are also an active part of the research. You are not like doing the research, you're part of it. And I think that's also really important. Uh, Also talking about public historians and their audiences and how do want they portray their own messages. So I think that's really important. So I don't know if Fabio or Alexander want to make a comment or a question. Please go ahead, Fabio.
I have a commentary and a question for Karla. Yeah. In first moment, the last week, in my course of public history, we wrote your book. A student presented your book, and the student was very, very happy with the book. And someone said that this book is a synthesis of a lot of important elements for public history. For example, the utilizing methodology of participation of the communities in the building process of the historical knowledge, and is a book with history and art, and where the artists are people from indigenous community. And the interesting is that is a medium, is a book, but is a virtual medium too, because you can find code for see in YouTube more information, digital information. So a very very interesting experience. And maybe a student say so a relationship between your book and the Colombian tradition of false border of the double history. And the idea is a history for the academy, but a history for the community too. And my interest is around the relationship between history and imagination, because you said that the people that prepared the comic worked with imagination of the clothing and a lot of aspects. So my question is about the relationship between history and imagination, because, for example, it's very, very important in general in the relationship between history and art, history and literature. There is a gap. The gap is the imagination. So I think that a lot of traditional historians are very conservative and don't like the imagination. But I think that is very, very important. No? And we cannot borrow the role of the imagination in the building of the historical knowledge. So this is my question for you.
Before letting Karla answer, I want to address your concern, Fabio. And there's a genre called historical fiction that is being like very. I mean, it's an old genre, but it takes care like of all these issues. And actually, some conservative historians don't consider that kind of accounts like proper history. So I think this is an old conversation, but I totally agree with you because as I was mentioning before, just the placement of the researcher as part of the process and imagining different outcomes is part of a very important part of the research. So yeah, I'm gonna just be quiet and let Karla talk. Thank you.
Yeah, there's the two things I really like to talk about. The first one is historical imagination. And definitely, I know that resistance on some traditional historians have regarding regarding imagination. I found that position a little like not really reflective on the research process, because maybe it's because of the way I'm seeing, but I see historical work full of imagination from the beginning. You have to create permanently the connection between the question you have with the sources you have. Imagine what other possible sources could be useful to watch. And sometimes this process of research is very intuitive. Like maybe if I check these newspapers, I'm going to find something here, and maybe interviewing these people. And sometimes you are just imagining and feeling things, and you go for these traces, this path, and after all this transition that is always guided by not knowing where you go, you establish the narrative. But this narrative is always incomplete. So you are actively connecting things that are not necessarily connect, establishing effect-cause relationship that usually are really difficult to establish in an unidirectional way, because most of the historical events had multiple causes. And multiple consequences. And usually you cannot portray all of the causes and all of the consequences, as you are selecting some. You are establishing relationships with literature, and this connection with literature, you use imagination. So writing history is a particularly imaginative work. So that's why for me, when a traditional historian says we don't use imagination, like, I really don't know what you're doing all the time. because we are imagining all the time, and that's not bad actually. What I see, what I was trying to explain here, is that when we are able to imagine, we openly say, I'm going to imagine historically. I'm going to be really rigorous in what I'm imagining, because I'm not The thing is, I think we need to understand what is a fiction better, because the only way we can believe a fiction is possible, a good fiction, is a fiction that talks about reality. All big fictionalized narratives are attractive because they talk about reality. No matter, let's think, for example, the Star Wars. I love to talk about the Star Wars. But people like the Star Wars not because it's happening in an unknown place in the universe and all have lasers and spaceships. Of course, it's attractive. But the main issue is very relatable, because they're talking about politics, they're talking about feelings, they're talking about parents' relationships. Those are things that happen that touch people's souls, people's emotions. If not, it's not a good fiction. So when we try to construct places using all this archival research we have, using all the knowledge we have created by writing histories, and you are able to imagine this possible scenario, following all this, that gives you a more complex idea what the past could have, than if you don't do it. So I think it is important to give some value to exercise of imagination, but also identify what does it mean to imagine historically, because at the same time you can always like, I'm going to imagine, I'm not going to research anything, I'm going to just imagine things. And that's not the idea. But you can also be a crappy historian by looking very few documents and write a history that is not very rigorous. So it's not because you are imagining, it's because you're lazy or you are not really critical with your sources. So if you are researching a decent amount of documents, you are making critical readings of those documents, you are actualizing the literature, you are trying to mix methods and sources. Actually, this process of imagination can be way more rigorous and more consistent and rich than a work made by a person that considers themselves very traditional and only sees one kind of source. So yeah, and across these last years, I have decided that I'm going to ignore all traditional this traditional position, because you have to select your public too. What is your audience? And they are not my audience. So yeah, times is going to change, and I hope. Yeah.
Yes.
And the other thing is the positionality and the Falsbordian thing regarding of positionality. I think this process has been a little bit as a therapy to me, because I usually was asked, why are you writing this history? If you are not an indigenous person. And it's something that I talk a little bit in the introduction, like and I was saying that some of indigenous communities, the feel that I have is that some indigenous communities actually doesn't need this kind of history, but I still think that we need this history also. And I'm talking about me as a mestizo person, because I think the idea of the mestizo was to erase all indigenous past. We cannot name our ancestors, for example. It's something that is not happening with people with European descent. When I talk to people who has very clear European descent, they know where they came from, where were the great grandfathers and mothers. They knew for the places where they arrived, what they do. And for some mestizo people, that the memory is not that clear. We don't know. And why? And this is related with a specific way in which national histories has been written. So in these national histories we feel that that history is not ours, but most of people in Colombia, in my case, are like me, are also mestizos, are brown like me. So why we cannot understand, why we don't conceive that the history of indigenous peoples is part of our history? I wanted to know more. At the beginning, I thought that I was making the history of others, but I was not making the history of others. I was making my part of my own history. And for me, it was really, it's a question that always happens when I go to make workshops or something. They tell me what is your town? To what ethnicity you belong? And I don't know. But I know I at some point in my ancestry I belong to a town, but I don't have that information anymore. I'm never going to know. But I think it's important for our national histories to reflect on ourselves more, on our positionality, on why we understand the way our own history is the way we understand it. So that's why I still think that this history is also useful, even though for some indigenous communities, this history about the relationship with the state is not that relevant for a lot of us. We should know more, because what I have found is that these interpretations, the different leaderships shape a lot of our legal system, and they participated actively in the legal systems we have today, and actually we are proud sometimes of internationally. So I think we need to follow more this idea of position ourselves into the history, into the narrative, and don't be afraid of follow these autobiographical needs for our own, for creating narratives, because our personal histories are always collective too. And the other, regarding false border, yeah, of course, I think, of course, I think public history participation has a link to what false border was doing. But also I think we need to recognize that there were a lot of debates, even between false border and his friends, regarding the methods, and particularly with the idea of returning the knowledge. Because what I was experiencing, what I want to specify here, is that I didn't went to the resguardos, or I didn't make the workshops with the idea of returning some knowledge, because they already now have knowledge. They don't, in some cases, they don't even need my knowledge, the knowledge I have. But I want to open a space in which we all share our different knowledges, and we can use our different knowledge regarding different things for our purpose. And I don't have to be in charge of these uses of those knowledges. And I think sometimes we are so afraid of losing control, because at some point in the participatory action research, from the old times, I have the feeling that first the knowledge, it was something that was only produced by the academic, and then was returned for the people to be mere receptors and use it in certain things, but that they were not actually creating that knowledge, and that it was the researcher who was in control of these dynamics. And I think that the relevant thing here is that the researcher is just a participant in this dynamic. And what I want to do in Transmedia is to open up these spaces as conversations. And sometimes I'm going to think that this conversation was really, really engaging for me. And in some cases, it was like the case that shut up and sit down and watch. and I think, and I never would know if that follow other conversations, and I don't need to know that either, and that's okay. That we open the spaces, we create things. That doesn't mean that we don't keep in touch. I think it's important to establish the links and the community we have created, but the people are allowed to use the result of the discussions as they wish, even if they say, well, I don't need this kind of history, or maybe we should know more about this history, or maybe they integrate both histories in order to understand something better, but this is not on my dominion. Like, they should do it if they want. If they don't, it's okay if they don't.
You will remind me of an event I did 2 years ago with a group of researchers from India. And one of the professors that I was talking to, she said, public historians need to position themselves as part of the public and not as researchers. And I think that's key. And I think that's key. And I think that's key. It's what you did with your graphic novel. If we, as historians or academics, or if we believe that story and we still position ourselves like we are observing and trying to teach or to impart knowledge, we are not doing a true public history exercise, and really not kind of any exercise. That's just, that's not useful for anything. That's really a practice that has been outdated for centuries now. However, I want us to talk a little bit about like the tension between history and public history. I do agree with you, Karla, that history has to be public, has to be for people, for the people to identify with it, to use it somehow. If it's not, I don't see any purpose of doing it, because if it's for a book to be stored in a shelf for you to read, you and your family to read, nothing. So I would like a little bit of your thoughts on that. And I also know Fabio is teaching a public history course. I would like your thoughts on that. I can tell you that in the United States, however, it's less now, but that tension still persists a little bit, like with more conservative historians that are a little bit older than us. However, I see a big movement about precisely that. Like then we're talking about co-creation and things like that, and also the conscience that if the research is not going the way you expect it to, change it. Just follow other logics, but be flexible enough to know when to stop and not to force any kind of result just to achieve something that you have thought from the beginning. So
I forgot to say something.
yes.
Is that I'm so excited that Fabio that you are reading the comic with your students. I'm so happy about that news. So I really would like to know more about their readings and their questions and their critics. That makes me really happy, Fabio. Thank you. And regarding what you already said, Jimena, yes, I think things are changing. I think they have been changing from a long time, but it's really difficult, because when I talk sometimes with other historians, they say, yeah, I wanted to do that. I really believe in that, but I don't have time. but I need to find a tenure track position, but I need to publish, and if I don't publish these articles, I'm not going to find a job. And it's an institutional thing, it's a structural thing. Like at some point, our main enemies maybe were these traditional historians that really believe in objective history. But for the feeling I have right now, this is not our main enemy anymore. It's more that, or I don't know, I'm not sure. Like it's kind of the structure. It's a lot of constraints that doesn't allow that we change our practice. Because in order to change our practices, we need to change the curriculum, for example. We need to change the way we approach to young students, the way we evaluate, the techniques we teach them. Because if we wanted to explore different media, they should be not only be learning how to write articles since day one, but how to create podcasts, how to create videos, how to create comics, how to analyze all these different media in dialogue with the methods they are learning. We should have to learn the practices. We should have to modify a lot of our historiographical courses of historiography. And I think this is what is not changing, and I'm not sure if this is not changing because they don't believe it has to change, or because changing it, the structure is so heavy that it makes me so difficult to change all these things. But the thing is, if we don't do that, we are going to disappear because his faculties of history progressively have less and less students, because most of the knowledge people are learning about history, regarding history, are not the knowledge that is producing in the faculties of history, but the historical images that are communicated in novels, in films, and social media. And it's kind of annoying that some TikTokers that are not particularly rigorous in research, or but not very rigorous in how they handle with historical questions, are more efficient and creative in communicating their knowledge than we. And the problem is not there. It's not them. It's us. We need to learn how to do that. And we should start working together in order to share knowledge, because we need to communicate better, and we need to reflect more on why this kind of communication can enrich historical research, and could open a new historiographical questions and new methods and new ways of making history.
Javier, would you like to add something? No? Okay. We have a few minutes left. Karla, I don't know if you want to wrap up with something. I want to ask, the novel, the graphic novel, it's in Spanish?
Yes.
And
yes.
Is there going to be an English version?
I would like, but I don't have any offers, so I would love to do that. But yes.
And where can people find it? Where can people go and find the novel?
In the online version, there is an online version that people can access in the Uniandes portal, the Uniandes library. And that's on the online version, and the book can be only buy in Colombia, but for the people who are in other places, I think it would be a good opportunity to check the online version. They have these two formats.
So the online version is at the portal of the Universidad de los Andes from Bogotá, Colombia.
Yeah, in
Yes,
Ediciones Unidas. That's the
Ediciones
editorial. That is a different webpage,
Yeah.
but yes,
Yeah, but
Ediciones
I'm
Unidas.
sure if they look for the title and put Uniandes, they will get to the link.
Yeah, in Google. Yeah, in Google you put
okay.
Community Cultura Ediciones Unidas and you can find easily
I hope that it gets translated at some point. I'm sure people from the other side, like English readers, would be happy to read it. So if there's no more questions or comments, I want to thank you, Karla, for coming to talk to us about this research, this work. I am a fan. I admire it. I saw you presented it in Bogotá, Colombia. I have my own copy. I think it's really, really important. Again, not because of the story you're telling that is important, but how you are telling it, and like all the components you put there to make it like more available to any kind of audience. I think that's a very important exercise. How a very rigorous academic dissertation can be then the outcome could be this kind of very engaging and entertaining and even beautiful, because the illustrations are beautiful products. So thank you very much. I just want to remind people who are going to see us or who are here that next week on October 16 we have Fabio with his students from Ecuador. They're going to present their works of the class they are doing, and on the 23rd we're going to have a guest from India who's going to talk about a bibliography of South Asia that he's doing related to public history. So thank you very much for being here, and I hope to see you soon.
Thank you again, Jimena, for inviting me. I thank you all for hearing me out, and yeah, see you next time.